Hi, I am Becky Burns Gibson. Welcome to this podcast. I can be found on Ravelry and Instagram as Becky Burns Gibson. Today will be a sew-along for the Butterick B5538, and I will be sewing view B, and I will be tracing size 2X. This is one of my favorite patterns. I've made it many times. It's one of my tried and true patterns. And the pattern calls for fluid fabrics to be used, but I've made it many times out of quilting cotton and flannel, and today I will be making it again out of flannel. To make this shirt, you'll need your pattern, fabric, tracing paper, serger and serger thread, rotary cutter, shears, pins, seam ripper, needles that are appropriate for your fabric, bias binding. The pattern calls for 11 5/8 of an inch buttons, but I will be using 6 5/8 of an inch buttons and 5 7/8 of an inch buttons. You'll need a marking tool, sewing machine thread, sewing machine, ironing board and iron, a French curve, tracing pencil, a cutting mat, and medium weight fusible interfacing. The first thing we are to do when making this shirt is to look at the back of your pattern envelope and look at the bust size measurement. The waist and hip size measurement are drafted generously on this pattern, so we really only need to look at the bust size. My bust size is 50 inches, so I will be cutting the size 2X. Next, we're going to iron all of our pattern pieces. This will make for a more accurate tracing. Next, we are to figure out which pattern pieces we want to trace. I'm going to trace the side front, piece number 1, piece number 2 for front A and B, number 4 side back, number 5 the back, number 6 the back neck facing, number 10 the sleeve for view B, 11 the placket for view B, 12 the cuff for view B, and 15 the guide for buttonholes for A and B. Okay, one thing to notice on your pattern pieces are the finished garment measurements, which you will see this symbol, and that tells you that it's going to give you the finished garment measurement. So here is going to be the bust measurement. So you're going to look at this and make sure that the amount of ease that is built into the garment is going to be okay with you. For example, I am tracing size 2X, and the finished garment measurement is 54 inches. And since my bust size is 50 inches, I'd say 4-inch ease is a good ease amount for me. So now it's time to trace our pattern pieces. Don't skimp on this step. Don't just cut out your pattern pieces straight from the tissue paper. You're going to need your pattern again in a different size. So I use Swedish tracing paper for my tracing, and find your line that represents your size, and they all look different, so it's easy to keep track of what you're tracing. Include all notches, include all circles, include the grain lines, because these are necessary for the construction of your garment. Okay, now we have cut out all of our tracings. We have labeled each piece with the piece number, what it is, how many that we're supposed to cut out of fabric, and how much we're supposed to cut out of interfacing. For example, this sleeve you cut 2. We've labeled it with the pattern number and the size that we cut. Now on piece number 10, there is a marked area for slashing. Later on, we're going to be slashing the material in this spot in preparation for inserting the sleeve placket. And you are going to need to mark that on piece number 10. Some pieces, such as piece number 11, the placket, it notates a different seam allowance. So most of the time the seam allowance for apparel is 5/8 of an inch. For this piece, the seam will be 1/4 of an inch. So you'll want to note that on the tracing. The cuff, for example, you cut 4 out of fabric and you cut 2 out of interfacing. So you want to be sure to mark that. The collar, you're going to cut 2 of the fabric on the fold and cut 1 of interfacing on the fold. And you're going to mark where the little line is and the arrows. That's where you're supposed to line it up on the fold. And if you're supposed to cut a pattern piece on the fold, you won't have a grain line. Pattern piece number 6, the back neck facing. There is a different seam allowance to be noted on this piece, which is a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Piece number 4 and piece number 1 have a knockout on the side for they want you to make a slit in the side of the shirt, and that's for finishing that slit. But I don't like that slit. I've tried to make it several times and I could never make it with a professional look. Therefore, I cut the side flush. So I sew up the seam just normally. I don't trace out the knockout, and I don't try to make a slit there. So if you have a long torso or short torso or longer short arms, you're going to want to also trace the lengthen and shorten lines onto the pattern pieces. And now would be the time when you would perform the operation of separating the fabric piece by the lengthen and shorten line and adding in the whatever length that you need, or shortening it by whatever length that you need. I will not be doing this. I'm 5'5", which is average for most patterns, and I never have to lengthen or shorten. Also, when I lay out my fabric and I lay out my pattern pieces, you can go by the instructions on how to lay out the fabric, how to lay out the pattern pieces for cutting, so that it will make the most economical use of your fabric. But I don't really like doing that. I enjoy buying extra fabric and just laying it out the way that it pleases me. It's time to pin our tracing to the fabric. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the grain line, and we're going to measure the grain line from the selvage. The selvage is the unfinished edge of the fabric. So we're going to measure, pin, Then move it across to the end of the grain line. Measure, adjust your pattern piece, and pin. I'm going to pin around all of the edges. I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to specially cut out my notches, and I'm going to mark any circles with a piece of chalk. So when I cut out piece number 1, the fabric was folded, so that satisfied the requirement, cut 2. Piece number 2, the front, we cut 4 out of the fabric. So to satisfy this requirement, I'm going to fold again. Lining up the selvage with the edge. Now again, measuring the grain line to make it straight, pinning all corners, and cutting it out. We're ready to cut the interfacing for piece number 2. We're supposed to cut 2 of interfacing, and because they have to be opposites, the interfacing going on either side of the shirt, they have to be opposites. We are going to fold the interfacing onto itself instead of stacking it up, because then you won't get opposite pieces. So we're going to fold it over on itself. Pin it down, cut it out. So we have finished cutting out all of our fabric and all of our interfacing. The first step in construction of this garment is to attach the interfacing, and we're going to do that with a hot iron. And each piece of interfacing has a smooth side and a sticky side. So you want to attach it sticky side to the fabric and smooth side up. It's very important because if not, you'll ruin your iron. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take piece number 1, and on both of piece number 1 we're going to E-stitch from the top notch to the bottom notch. And when we E-stitch, we set our stitch length to a longer stitch length. So I've got mine set to stitch length 4. And then you make sure that you have the tails of your thread hanging out of either side when you get done, so that you can use that to ease in this material. And I'm going to do this within the seam allowance, so I'm going to do it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, next we're going to sew piece number 1 to piece number 2. So we're going to set aside our interface piece number 2s, and we're only going to work with our uninterfaced piece number 2s. And we're going to lay them right side up, and we're going to lay our piece number 1s right side down. We're going to match up the middle notch and pin. Then we're going to pull the bobbin threads to ease We're going to pull the bobbin threads to ease the material in piece number 1 so that it fits in between the 2 notches. We're going to pin the lower notch. Then we're going to ease on the side of the upper notch, and we're going to pin at the upper notch. The goal is not to create puckers, and the goal is not to create gathers. The goal is to have a smooth princess seam. So the goal is just to ease that material in between the notches. So pin it all the way up and all the way down, and then I'll meet you at the sewing machine. Okay, so now we're going to sew piece number 1 to piece number 2. We need to sew with piece number 1 on top because this is where the ease is. And we need to remember to return our stitch length to a normal stitch length. So I'm returning mine back to 2.5. I'm going to take a look and see what seam allowance is on this pattern. I'll be right back. Okay, the pattern pieces do not show this seam as being an exception, so I'm going to sew it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the end. Okay, now I'm going to take this seam to my serger and I'm going to finish it off together, and then I'm going to iron it to one side. Now if you don't have a serger, don't be discouraged. You can use a zigzag stitch to finish the edges before you sew them together. And I'm going to press the seam of this garment toward the armhole. So the next thing that we're going to do is sew piece number 4 to piece number 5. We have 2 piece number 4s. We're going to lay the piece number 5 right side up, and then we're going to lay a piece number 4 on top of it and match up our notches and pin it all the way up and down. Then we're going to do the same with the other piece number 4. And we're going to take it to our sewing machine and sew the seams at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to finish the seams at the serger. And we're going to press the seams toward the armholes. Okay, the fronts and the back are assembled. We're going to attach the front and the back by the shoulder seams. And after we attach the front and the back by the shoulder seams, we're going to sew the side seams together. Once we do that, we will be taking those seams to the serger and finishing those off, and we're going to press the seams toward the back. So now it's starting to look like a shirt. The next step is we're going to stay stitch around the neckline. You don't want to scrimp on this step. You want to make sure to do it because it's going to keep your neckline from stretching out, making your collar hard to fit. And I'm going to stay stitch within the seam allowance. So I'm going to stay stitch at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Next thing that we're going to be doing is sewing the facings. So we will be attaching piece number 6 to the 2 piece number 2s. So we're going to lay our piece number 6 this way, and then right sides together we're going to lay pieces number 2 like so. We're going to match up the notches. Match up the notches and pin. We're going to sew these together here. Then I'm going to finish off the edges of the facings at the serger. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch, or a really pretty finish is a Hong Kong finish, which is with bias binding. So you can look that up and see how to do that. That makes a really pretty finish. Now we have sewn our facings together, and we have serged around all edges. The pattern only calls for serging around the outer edges, but I like all my edges to be serged. So the next step is to sew the collar. So we're going to put the collar together, and this is piece number 7. We're going to put the collar together, right sides together. We're going to match up all the seams, and we're going to sew around the unnotched edges. So don't sew here where there are notches. And we're going to sew it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So we're going to back stitch at the beginning. And then we're going to sew until you get to the tip, almost to the tip. And instead of just turning it, instead of just putting your needle in the down position, lifting your presser foot and turning it all the way around, instead turn it about 45 degrees. Put your presser foot down and take about 2 stitches. This will make a prettier corner once you turn it inside out. Now bring up your presser foot and turn it the rest of the way around and sew. So the top fabric that I'm sewing is longer than the bottom fabric. That's just because of the presser foot action. So that's why I'm stopping here. I'm going to take 2 stitches at a 45 degree, and then I'm going to turn it the rest of the way around and sew down to the edge. And back stitch. Before I turn out my collar, I'm going to clip the corners up to but not including the stitch line. I'm going to turn it inside out. I'm going to use a point turner on the edges, but you can use a fingernail, a pointy fingernail, and that will work well. But I do enjoy using a point turner. Try to make yourself a nice point without going through your fabric. Now I'm going to take this to the ironing board and I'm going to iron it down. I'm going to come back to my sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch around because I enjoy having a collar that's top stitched. I think it looks neat. Okay, so I've ironed down this collar and I'm going to top stitch around the edges. So to top stitch or to edge stitch, I use a blind stitch foot. A blind stitch foot makes an excellent foot for top stitching because it has a piece here that you can run your material and edge it right up to there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my needle all the way over. And I'm going to have a consistent stitch all the way around the collar. If you don't have a blind stitch, that's okay. You can use a regular standard foot, but you just won't get as consistent of a top stitch. Okay, so we have top stitched along the collar. Our next step is to attach the collar to the shirt. So we're going to lay the shirt right side up. We're going to put the interface side down against the shirt. We're going to match up notches and pin. Okay, and we're going to baste this collar on at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And basting means we're going to use a long stitch length, so I'm going to use a stitch length of 4. Okay, so we have sewn the collar to the shirt. We've basted it. And then because I like the inside of my garments to look nice, I serged all the way around the shirt and the collar. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach the facings. So here's the way the facing looks, but here's the way you're going to attach it, like this. And line it up with the notches, line it up with the edges, and all the way down the front of the facing and the edge of the shirt. Pin it all the way around, and then let's see what seam allowance we're going to sew it at. Okay, we're going to sew it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So make sure to set your stitch length back to 2.5. now turn out your facings. Use your point turner, and I don't have mine right now, so I'm going to use my fingernails. And then go to the ironing board and press this all down. Okay, now I'm going to top stitch around the edge of this shirt, and remember I use a blind stitch foot when I'm top stitching, and I'm going to set my stitch, I'm going to set my needle all the way over so that I have consistent top stitching all around my garment. It is now looking more like a shirt. The next thing that we're going to do is prepare our sleeve for our continuous lap placket placement. So I have made the marks with chalk for the legs of the triangle and the tip of the triangle. So we're going to sew a triangle right here by our markings. That's going to add strength when we slit the placket. Okay, I made it all the way up to the dot. I'm going to keep my needle down position, raise my presser foot, and I'm going to go across one stitch, and then I'll raise my presser foot again, and then I'll come back down. Forming the rest of my triangle. Now the sides of the triangle are the sides of the slit are reinforced. I'm going to go ahead and cut up to but not through the stitch at the circle. Okay. Next we take our placket, lay the right side of the placket against the wrong side of the fabric on the sleeve. And I've just discovered that my plackets are not long enough, so I'm going to go and cut 2 more plackets that are long enough. So I'm going to add about 1 inch to the placket length. Okay, so I have lengthened my plackets, And again, I'm going to add I'm going to place the placket, right side of the placket to the wrong side of the sleeve at the slit. And I'm going to sew all the way down to the circle. Back stitch at the beginning. Okay, now I'm going to turn my fabric. So that I can sew the other side of my placket, the other side of the triangle. Back stitch at the end. Okay, I have successfully sewed it. There's no, I have successfully sewn it. There is no hole here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this to the ironing board, and we're going to fold it like this and iron it, and fold it a second time and iron it. Okay, I have taken my placket to the sewing machine and I have pressed it over twice, making sure that when I pressed it over twice, it covers up the stitching line that I made previously. And I am going to edge stitch using my blind stitch foot so that I get a consistent stitch across the placket. Place my needle over. Be careful on this corner to pull down your fabric so that it covers your previous line of stitching. Cutting off the excess fabric. And now we have our continuous placket. The next step is going to be to ensure that the placket stays folded correctly. So you're going to fold one side over the other, just like that, so that your placket is placed the way that you want to wear it. And we're going to sew a line right here, a diagonal line right here at the top near the circle, and that is going to hold our placket into place. To change my foot back to a general purpose foot. Return my needle to the previous position. And just sew a 45-degree angle across the top. Now your placket will stay down, folded correctly. And we're going to go and iron these puckers so they won't be there. Just to look at what our continuous lap plackets look like once they're finished. Okay, next we're going to prepare the cuffs. So we're going to take an uninterfaced cuff. This is piece number 12. And we're going to take the edge that is notched and we're going to turn it in by 5/8 of an inch and iron it down. And then we're going to take an interfaced number 12 and we're going to line up the side edges and the bottom edge, not the top edge. Pin it. We're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all the way around the sides and the bottom, keeping the top open. And we're going to do this at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then we're going to clip our corners and turn up our cuffs inside out. Okay, I have finished the cuff and I have top stitched all the way around the sides and the bottom of the cuff. I still have my top of the cuff open. I have prepared the sleeves. I have serged the edges of the sleeves. I have sewed them together at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, right sides together. I have put in ease stitching into the shoulder of the sleeve. And again, you're going to use a basting stitch that is a long stitch length, such as stitch length 4. And we're going to leave our tails of our threads at the end so that we can pull and adjust for the ease. The next thing that we'll be doing, we will be attaching the cuffs, right side of the cuff or interface side of the cuff, to the wrong side of the sleeve. Okay, we have taken the sleeves to the sewing machine and we've had to use our free arm to get these cuffs sewn on. But we have sewn a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. And so this is what it looks like. And then you take it and you turn it inside out. And you tuck up your seam up into your cuff. And then you sew down through all layers, all the way across, and then when you're done, this is what it looks like. Very nice. It's going to make a very nice cuff. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to add the sleeves into the shirt. So we're going to turn the shirt inside out, and with the right sides out, we're going to stick the sleeve inside of the garment and through the armhole. And then we're going to take the seams on the bottom of the sleeve and the seam on the bottom of the body of the shirt, and we're going to pin it together. Then we're going to match up our notches. This is important so you get the right sleeve in the right place. The double notches go in the back of the garment, and the single notches go in the front. So when we get up here, we have to fit the sleeve into the sleeve hole. So we're going to pull our threads till we can ease in this material and pin it all the way around the armhole. Okay, so I have eased in all the fabric in the sleeve to make it fit nicely inside the armhole. And I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew around this at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to take it to the serger and I'm going to finish off the edges together at the serger. Okay, our next step is going to be to hem the shirt, and I prefer to use bias tape, extra wide double fold in a complementary color. And here's how you use it. Take it out of the package and unfold it. And you're going to attach it to the right side of the shirt on the hem. And you're going to line up the edge of the bias binding with the edge of your hem. And you're going to sew on this first crease, attaching the bias binding to the shirt. So the next thing that we're going to do to get this bias binding attached is we're going to fold this over the raw edges, just like that. And then we're going to turn it up one more time. See that? Now you're going to sew that down. Okay, the shirt is finished, everything except the buttons and buttonholes. I will not be sewing on the buttons and buttonholes because each sewing machine is so different in how they want you to go about that. So read your sewing machine manual and follow their instructions on installing buttons and buttonholes. But we need to install them on the shirt and the cuffs, and I'll show you the finished product. Well, we're all done. Thank you for joining me on this sew-along. If you've enjoyed what you see, please click like, subscribe, and share. I know this video was quite long, but I hope it was beginner friendly. And thank you for watching.